Hi, I'm Kennett. I'm based on campus at Charlestown University. I'm going to talk about some work I did some time ago out here on freshwater turtles. So what you've got in front of you is McMinn's Lagoon. It's just on the outskirts of Darwin. It's a fantastically beautiful reserve. It's a nature reserve and it's a home to about 1,000 long-necked turtles. I spent 4 years here catching freshwater turtles. A typical field day would be launch the canoe, set about 20 or 30 traps, baited traps, and then over the period of 3 or 4 days keep coming back and checking those traps. And I'd be marking and measuring turtles. And I think I marked many hundreds of freshwater turtles in here. So floodplains are incredibly productive places to live for a long-necked turtle. There's plenty to eat, but you've got to deal with the fact that the floodplain is wet, it's entirely covered in water in the wet season, and it's probably going to have more water. If you're a long-necked turtle, you need to find somewhere to nest. Most turtles around the world find a dry spot out of the water, they'll lay their eggs there, the eggs develop and the hatchlings emerge and come back into the water. For the long-necked turtle though, it's incredibly unpredictable where that dry ground is going to be, because we have these huge wet seasons where the water levels just come up and they keep coming up. Eventually a dry nesting site might be a kilometre or many kilometres from where the dry season water level is going to be. Long-necked turtles get around this by nesting underwater, the only turtle on the planet that lays its eggs underwater. So the challenge of laying your eggs underwater is how do you stop them swelling up and cracking and the embryo dying, which is what would ordinarily happen with turtle eggs, in fact most eggs when you put them in water. The osmotic potential draws water into the egg and it expands and cracks. Long-necked turtles get around this by having an unusually thick and hydrophobic vitelline membrane, which is the membrane that surrounds the yolk. So water still comes into the eggs, but instead of the yolk expanding and eventually killing the embryo, they can stay underwater for up to 22 weeks or more before eventually the ground dries out, oxygen gets into the nest and the embryo starts developing. What was really interesting is when we did some experiments, we found that if you incubated the eggs and they had already started to develop and then got flooded, it automatically killed the eggs. So the only way they could have this waterproofing, if you like, that could survive a month or more underwater was to lay the eggs directly into water. So that's why long-necked turtles nest underwater. So during the dry season, long-necked turtles are buried under the mud, estivating under the mud. And that means that all across places like this and across the floodplains, there's turtles just waiting to be dug up. As you can imagine, for Aboriginal people, they're an incredibly important food source throughout the dry season. People would look for the little places in the mud where the turtles have been pushing their head up to form a little mb, and they would look for that. In other places they would go around with a sharpened stick and probe for the turtles in the mud. And not surprisingly, when you go to the rock art galleries in Kakadu and Litchfield and all those other places in Arnhem Land, you'll find long-necked turtles all across the walls of those art galleries. So long-necked turtles have a multitude of names in Northern Australia. They come from different places and have different local language names. What was exciting was in the 1990s we got to describe an entirely new species of long-necked turtle that lives up in the sandstone country, and we call it Keeladina burrungangii. And burrungangii was the name that the old men in the Kakadu region said belonged to that turtle. Now that's a turtle, it's a little bit different to the one we got down on the floodplain. We don't know where it lays its eggs. There's a whole lot of stuff we don't know about that species. So as a PhD student studying long-necked turtles, I had this challenge of how do you find a nest. I spent weeks tromping around places like this looking for nests, and I started to talk to some of the Aboriginal women about where you'd find turtle nests, and they would sometimes say, oh, you find him around the paperbark tree, or you'd find him under the water. Because none of that made sense to a biologist, the idea that a turtle would lay its eggs underwater. But after having 3 years of never seeing a nest, I decided it was time for some drastic research action. So working with a vet and a surgeon, we collected some turtles, gravid turtles that we knew had eggs because we'd x-rayed them, and we surgically removed a couple of eggs and put in a little egg-shaped transmitter into the oviducts amongst the other eggs. And the idea being that the turtle would go away, lay its eggs, and we would then be able to find the nest. And that's exactly what happened. So the turtles went away. For weeks I would follow those turtles around until I was certain that the eggs had been laid, and then I would dig up where the eggs were. And the very first time I found a nest of eggs was under about 20 centimetres of water. And after that we found at least half a dozen nests that way. So it was very obvious from that and the work that we'd done showing that eggs could survive underwater in experiments that that's indeed what was happening. Long-necked turtles and nesting underwater.